Well, cool. I guess we can jump in. So howdy, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Rednecks Rising, your favorite podcast all about the evolution of revolution and redneck history. And today I'm excited to be sitting down with my friends Gina and Raph from the amazing Fire on the Mountain podcast. Thank you so much for being here, y'all.
Thank you so much for having us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so glad to be able to learn from your experience and also get to know two more revolutionary Appalachians. So tell us a little bit about this.
Oh my, revolutionary Appalachian.
You are a revolutionary. On this podcast, you have to be a revolutionary. So you've officially been knighted into the team. So tell us a little bit about y'all. Who are you?
Okay. So I moved here to North Carolina when I was 12, and I moved from New Jersey, which was a huge culture shock for me. So not being from here was a big deal when I was little, right? Hendersonville is a really small community. It was a very different community at the time. It was so incredibly tight-knit and conservative that it felt a lot like I couldn't breathe for a long time, and I could not wait to get out of town, and I wanted to never come back. And I think that was kind of the consensus that we all had as kids. You know, we were all just like, fuck this old school redneck bullshit.
Like in particular, anyone who identifies as progressive, I felt the same way, and I was from here. So
yeah, exactly. Right. So there weren't a whole lot of options here. It wasn't like there was anything to do at night. There was just nothing. And as I started to get into some Appalachian cultural things, I think contra dance was probably my first like memory of doing something that was culturally specific to Appalachia. And I felt so taken in by it. Like I felt like there's no way that we're lucky enough that like this is from here. And like mountain music was the next thing. Like I just was floored. And so after that, I kind of became like obsessed. And I was like, okay, this culture is so phenomenal, and it's so cool. And it's so, there's so much resiliency and there's so much resourcefulness that like we've created, especially as somebody who came from New Jersey, I had created this idea of what Appalachian culture was that is so not accurate. So I decided to stay, and our little town is changing a lot. You know, we're getting a lot of Asheville trickle down, and it's changing the community in a way that I never thought. Like we had a women's march, a pro-choice rally, recently, and I cried for like 10 minutes. I just stood there and cried because I could not believe. We went in a group because I was concerned about safety. Like that's what our town has been. And we got there when there were hundreds of people. We were like, what? Like in Hendersonville. Wow. It blew my mind. I know. So now that the community's changing, I've also been able to find like a foothold in work. I did early childhood education for a long time, and now I do family resource work. So I work for a super dope nonprofit as my day job, and I work with teens who are pregnant and parenting, so I get to do resource and referral for them, and then I podcast and DoorDash by night. That's about it. Yeah.
You love a multi-talented queen. I sling drinks at weddings by night and also work at a nonprofit in the daytime. So
nice. Oh yeah.
Very similar.
Yes,
I just love, like, I really appreciate you naming that, like, you think that like idea that you had created about Appalachia. And like, I also just want to like cut you a little slack and like give you a little grace, because I think actually like that idea, and part of what we're hoping to do in our podcast is like shed light on this idea that mainstream media has really created about Appalachia and like the South in order to keep people from like
keep people down.
Exactly. Keep people down, keep people from working together, like create this false sense of like moral superiority towards those like trashy white poor folks, you know? And so like, I just really appreciate you naming that, because I think that's just your lived experience, like explains like how untrue that idea is that we get handed by mainstream media. So like, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I came here in 2006 from, I actually moved here from Alaska. But I was only in Alaska for like, I guess like 3 or 4 months. Before that, I guess you could say I was mostly raised in Montana. So I've always been a rural, sort of like small town person. I definitely never lived anywhere like New Jersey, except I was born in Miami. So I was born in the city. But yeah, and I lived before. Whenever I was a lot younger, my parents did live here. They lived actually in Lake Toxaway for a while and in Sapphire, which is all Transylvania County. And then they split up, and my dad went to Montana, and my brother and I went with him. And my sister stayed here and was raised by my mom. So my family's kind of always been split up like that across the country, which was really difficult for me to navigate growing up, and led to a lot of you know critiques and learned behaviors and systems of adaptation, and like a lot of shit that now as a 32-year-old I'm still trying to unpack myself. Kind of part of my journey personally in the work that I do is I do a lot of like personal like reflection, a lot of whether it's the art, the things that I write, the podcast that I'm a part of, or the music that I perform, or the actions that I take, be it direct action or showing up to demonstrations. All of that, it works in Congress with sort of like an examination of who I am as a person, and what my story has looked like getting to this point, and how I can improve and continue to grow and stuff. So I would say that coming here initially, I hated it, mostly because my mom took me away from my dad, who I, loved, and I was out and I was literally at one point living in a tent in Alaska, like by a river basin in Haines, Alaska. Like I was out in the middle of nowhere, and I loved it, and it was some adventure. And, hindsight, you look back and you're like, wow, that was extremely traumatic. And there's no reason why you should have been living in a tent by a river, in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, right before the winter set in, not even going to school and everything. I missed out on a whole semester of school. So I came here, and, I remember I went to East Henderson High School here in Hendersonville for my last 2 years of high school. And I remember coming in and them being like, well, you don't really have any attendance. You haven't really gone to any classes in a long time. So unfortunately, there's only like a month and a half left of the semester, and there's no way that you can attend enough classes and, do well enough to pass anything. So you're going to fail on attendance a whole semester. So my GPA, whenever I was in Montana, went from like a 3.6, 3.7, somewhere in there, to immediately starting my next semester of my junior year to like, I think it was like a 1.9. Like it literally, like I failed across the board everything. And I had to spend my last 2 years trying to rebuild my GPA in order to try to maybe go to college. And the highest I ended up being able to get, it was like a 3.1 or something like that by the time I graduated. So I didn't get to do a lot of the things that in my mind growing up in Montana that I thought it was like, I'm going to go and be a Bobcat, like, or, I'm going to go to MSU and I'm going to do all this, and kind of, threw a wrench in the gears, and I had to adapt, and I had to pivot, and I didn't like my mom. I thought Hollister was a fucking school. Like I was like, everybody's walking around with Hollister t-shirts, and I'm like, is that the school that everybody goes to here? Like I had no idea. So total culture shock. The size of the school, I would have had a graduating class like 350 kids in Montana. So I didn't like, my bitterness here was not because of any learned or assumed culture. It was literally personal. Like I was just an angry, like emo kid who's just like, I just want to go back in the woods, and like I want to die and be eaten by mushrooms and moss somewhere. I don't want to be in this like terrible place where people listen to awful music and are so cruel to each other, But I stayed because of the people and the friendships and the connections that I made. Ultimately, it was never a part of my intention to be an activist or to be any kind of political, oriented individual. I wanted to get into solar, and I went to NC State for PV installation, and I am a certified PV technician. So that's commercial, residential, and utility scale installation and maintenance of photovoltaic systems, so solar energy. And that was 2015, and I thought that I would be able to, kick off a career in this, and I could start working for like a private solar company. And then Trump got elected, and all of the federal subsidies for renewable energy went away. And that was honestly, at the time in 2015, I was 25. That was the reason why I cried, was because I felt like I had just accomplished so much. And I was so proud of myself for taking initiative and wanting to do something I wanted to do. And then I immediately realized that the entire solar industry was about to become hella predatory. Without any support or initiative from the federal government, everything was going to go to shit. And it has now. I mean, now the solar industry is extremely predatory. Solar loans weren't even a thing in 2015, but that's a whole other conversation. But so I that was the first time that I think really that I felt the sadness and the anger that made me want to do something about it. Because up until that point, I just voted for Obama twice. So, I didn't really have anything to, be angry. I could, feel upset about things, but I wasn't really cognizant of how politics directly impacted me until I had made the intentional decision of going to school for something. And then I saw something like an executive election, how that could influence my, career path. So from there, it just led to the beginning of my path. I spent 23 days in Buncombe County corrections for direct action. I had also taken it upon myself to raise some community awareness around a sexual predator in Asheville who's now dead. And what is it?
I know the story you're talking about. I'm like, my brain's exploding right now, but I don't want to interrupt. I can't. This is such a good story. I'll just say I'm writing down all my questions for.
I don't want to like take up too much time talking about that unless you want to sidebar it, and then we can. But because I know it's about both of us and not me. So, but I will say that it was during COVID that I was in Buncombe County, and during COVID you have to spend 14 days in quarantine, which. Honestly, my experience was not in it, right? Like what I was saying before is like, unfortunately for me, part of what's shaping my personal identity has been my path. Like the journey that I have been on has informed, like being in Buncombe for 14 days in a cell and hearing like literally grown men lose their minds and go to tears just because they got a traffic violation and they have to be quarantined for 14 days and they can't, get bailed out because they don't know anybody that can get them out. So they just have to sit there until their court date. And no matter what, they have to sit in that cell. And it's like once every 72 hours, they get 15 minutes of free time. And during that 15 minutes, you'd have to choose whether to use the phone, order commissary, or to take a shower. So I didn't take a shower for 9 days because I had to use the phone in order to get in touch with my mom, who could put money on my commissary so that I could literally buy soap. So it was like phone, and then commissary, and then shower. And the last day I got to do commissary and shower at the same time. But so that's a whole other part of my experience was in Buncombe County, which now we know is like, I guess, one of the most deadly county jails in the state, if not the most deadly. And then after that, I ran for city council here in Hendersonville. I know I'm doing like leapfrogs. Like,
no idea that you ran for city council. Oh yeah, my gosh.
I ran last year. It was a big. I feel like it was a big election for as far as Hendersonville goes. There were a lot of important conversations happening here.
It was the 2021 election.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 2021. There were.
I'm gonna get a notebook.
Okay.
I need to write stuff down.
There were a lot of candidates, and Gina said she's going to get a notebook to write stuff down. But a lot of candidates. There was a primary. There were 6 of us. I was very honored to have made it through that primary to the general. It was a lot of the language that we saw there was sort of maybe some market testing for our county GOP that we saw, which now we see as being, mainstream normalized as far as like rural counties go, with like don't Asheville our Hendersonville, and then other counties we're starting to see like don't Asheville our Fletcher, or sorry, not counties, but municipalities. And a lot of like targeted language and everything. And ultimately in the primary ended up being myself and Debbie Roundtree, who was the other Democrat. Jerry Smith, who's the incumbent of some 12 years, and was almost statistically guaranteed to win this election. And it was 2 seats that were open. So, and then there was 1 Republican. So it's 2 Democrats, an independent, and a Republican. And I knew once I'd gotten through the primary and the other Democrat had gone in, that we are basically splitting the Democrat vote because Jerry's going to win. And if we split that Democrat vote, then she gets to consolidate the entire GOP, then she's probably going to win this election. So I, at that point, withdrew from the general and endorsed the Democrat, and she got elected. So, that consolidation of the progressive voting bloc, and we see in real time sort of like the manifest of that election and how it's been so beneficial to Hendersonville, who now has a staggered progressive majority on its city leadership. And that acts as, something like a basis of comparison to a larger, I don't want to call it a metro area, but to rural Appalachia. Asheville is kind of like a metro area, and a basis of comparison for, Democratic leadership and, independent progressivism. And, there's nobody's defunding our police, and nobody's out here like, the liberals aren't breaking into the shops and, stealing things. And,
it's an Antifa here. We don't know.
Yeah. So it's actually working out all right. We've got a lot of planning projects and everything that are coming down the pipeline and stuff. So I feel like that was a win. And then ultimately afterwards, it's like, well, what's next? And it's like, you had this lived experience of running for office, which kind of kept, it kind of lit like a political fire. And I've constantly had these like little stokes, like these like logs that keep getting thrown into this fire, and it keeps, building. And I totally didn't mean for that to be ironic, what I just said.
Oh, because of our podcast.
Because our podcast name.
Hey, we're here for the puns. We love it.
But yeah, so now I was like, Gina, I was thinking afterward, like, if no matter what, like a podcast, that should definitely happen. And I remember Gina sent a meme, and it was just like it was like bullet points of things millennials need, and it was like failed podcast. And I was like, sweet, well, let's do that. And yeah, I couldn't think of anybody personally more equipped, emotionally, intellectually, and like spiritually to co-host the podcast with where we are here. And I think that so far so good.
Ditto. Thanks. That was nice.
My dog decided that he also wants to be a guest of the podcast today. Yay! So everyone gets to hear Yogi.
Yeah.
We moved into an apartment from a single wide trailer that was like on its own piece of land. We didn't really have any neighbors, and this apartment complex, we're surrounded by neighbors, and my dog is not sure how to cope with it. So
oh yeah, it's so hard to go from like letting them have access to leashing and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, who are these strangers coming on my property? You're too close to my house.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, y'all. This is so much more powerful than I was even like anticipating. Just thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your story. And Raph, like, I have so many notes and I don't even know where to start. But I think it could be helpful if I share a little bit about my story and like how I ended up getting into activism, because it seems like we had kind of a similar journey. So the difference is that I grew up here. I grew up in Silva. But I was always like, I was raised Christian. My family's pretty conservative, but I always had these very, like, what people would peg as like leftist ideals, but I never we didn't actively talk about politics, so it was never something that like, I didn't identify politically any one way, but I remember having these conversations about like, I was coming of age when marriage equality was like becoming a topic, across the nation. And I just remember being like, why does anybody give a fuck? Like, it's not your business. And one of my family members at that point was like, well, you know, it's just the way it's always been. Like, we can't just change things. And in my little head, which now I know I'm neurodivergent, so fairness and justice is a thing for us. But like in my little head, I was like, but women couldn't vote for the longest time. Like, should we have just kept it that way? Like, that's so dumb. And my mom was a single mom when she had me. She was 19 when she got pregnant with me. And because she was a single mom, I was really raised by like the village of folks in Silva. She was working to try and keep a roof over our heads. So I had bedrooms and like neighbors' houses and aunts' houses. And one of the, like, all of our family was super poor. They all came from the military. My mom had grown up in Mississippi, and like all of the women had been nurses, and we know how nurses are treated. So my whole life I was watching like my cousins literally be killed by addiction or domestic violence. And they would be sleeping on our couch, like at my mom's house, when they didn't have a place to stay. And I just, my whole life, everyone around me was like, oh, well, you don't have to like struggle like we struggle. You're so smart. Like, all you have to do is go to college, and that is going to be your path out of this. And like you said, Gina, like my mindset, I was like, this place is so like, I don't fit in here. Like, what is wrong? Everyone's so conservative. I don't even understand why I don't fit in. And so I was like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to go to college and get out of here. And I ended up actually going to Western, so I didn't get out of here. I stayed. And my first year of college, one of the men who raised me, he was my uncle, and he had my initials along with all of my cousins' initials like tattooed on his arm. Like, he just sacrificed so much for us. He worked on cars and in construction. And I remember he had like this long black hair, and I would like braid his hair while he like picked his banjo. And like, it's just so like, I have these beautiful memories. And my first year of college, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And I watched for the first 2 years in college while he and my aunt sold everything that they had to try and pay for his treatment. This was before the Affordable Care Act had passed. And they were not homeowners at the time. So they were selling cars, like furniture, like whatever they could. And by the time he passed away, like what you were describing, Raph, about that, like that combination of like rage and sadness, that it's just like, you can feel your body shake from it. It's like literal fire in your belly is what it feels like. And I couldn't even go to his memorial service because I was just like, this was a man, like he was a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of like good, hardworking Appalachian man. And if anyone deserved the basic right of dying with dignity, it was him. And I just felt like, what gives? Like, he should have been given so much more than what he received. And at that point, that was right before Obama's re-election campaign, which was the first election that I was old enough to vote in. And of course, you know, Obama was like running on healthcare. And so that's really like what sparked my interest in like politics. I was like, oh, this is happening. I have to do something. This guy's talking about healthcare. And so I really ended up, at the same time I was deciding like what I was going to major in, and I went into social work. And I was like taking a bunch of intro courses, and intro to social work was one of them. And social work has a professional code of ethics, kind of like journalists or nurses do, that they have to abide by. And within the social work code of ethics, there's actually like specific principles dedicated to self-determination of like people. So like autonomy, recognizing like those who are living it are the experts. And then the other principle is around advocacy and social justice. And like there's a literal statement in there that is like, social workers are required to work against systems of injustice. And like the fact that this was happening at the same time that I was like waking up to politics, it was just kind of like the universe was like, this is where you need to be. And I didn't even know that like community organizing was a thing at this point. I just knew, I was like, okay, social justice, people don't need to die because they can't afford healthcare. And so I ended up like doing a bunch of campus organizing through the Democratic Party, blah, blah, blah. You'll find I ended up much farther left later on. But then I graduated also 2016 with my bachelor's degree. And at that point, so I had actually graduated with 2 bachelors, social work and Spanish. And I was still working 2 jobs Oh, you guys froze. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes. Okay, good. I was still working 2 jobs. I was waiting tables at a brewery and I was cashiering in a health food store. And I've been working since I was 15 years old. And I had worked my entire way through college and still graduated with $30,000 of student debt. Yeah. And at this point, I was like, all right, I've got 2 degrees and more debt than I even know what to do with. My partner, who's my husband, was a landscaper by trade, making less than $12 an hour as the foreman of his crew with no benefits. And between the 2 of us and our 3 jobs, like we still could not afford to put gas in the car to even get to work some days. And at that point, that was like the second point where I felt that internal rage building, because I was like, wait. I've done everything right. I was a teetotaler. I was not a party kid. I went to college. I did everything they told me to do. I followed the rules. If anyone should be able to succeed, it's me. I'm a little white girl, right? And at that point, that's when I learned, I guess that's when people started saying to me oh, if you actually want to get out of poverty, you got to get out of Appalachia. You can't just go to college. You got to leave this place. And that's when I really started to click for me that it was more than just one election or one politician or even federal policy, that it was oh, there is real coordinated betrayal of entire communities of people. And of course, people of color have known this for history, forever, right? But here I am in Appalachia being oh shit, it actually is happening.
There's systems.
Yeah. And so at that point, that's when I was oh, I can't just organize with the Democrats. I've got to organize my community. We have to win change here. And so at that point I had started it's kind of an underground rogue group of people. It was right after the Trump election. So there was all of these retired white folks who were we've got to do something. Trump just won. And so I started this underground group called Progressive Nation of Western North Carolina, just to try and channel that energy into something productive. So we started pushing for local resolutions about climate and healthcare and yada, yada. But anyways, I eventually went on to get my master's degree because I was oh shit, I've got to make some money somehow. And then it was really in my master's program that I started learning about there's a history of community organizing that we can learn from and pull from and grow. And I ended up, while I was in graduate school, spending a couple days in Wake County Detention Center for Direct Action after interrupting a legislative session in Raleigh. So I would love to hear more about what led to you spending time in Buncombe County Corrections. But just on my journey have ended up just being further and further radicalized left, because I feel the more I literally worked on Hillary's election in 2016 after Bernie lost, even though I was a Bernie stan. And while I was working for their campaign, so I did not apply. They ended up calling me after all of the college Democrats work that I had done. There's a politician here locally named Joe Sam Queen, who that's a story for another day. But he was oh, you need a local organizer for Western North Carolina. You should hire Chelsea. She's been doing this since she was in college, blah, blah, blah. So they literally called me and they're will you work for the Hillary campaign? We need an organizer for Madison, Swain, and Haywood counties, if you can take on those 3. And I was sure, I'll do the thing. So I built this really robust volunteer team. We were kicking ass. And then we get to early voting time. And my shift goals, and I don't know, you ran for office, so you probably understand the concept of you have to get so many shifts filled to get people to knock on enough doors to talk to voters. My shift goals for 3 counties, guess what the shift goals were?
I don't even want to. No.
0.
Wow.
What?
And they sent me out to Rutherfordton to go knock on doors. And when I confronted my regional organizing director and I was you hired me because I'm from here and I can speak the language of the people, she said verbatim, it is not worth our time for you to knock on doors in Western North Carolina. And that was really when I was no, because you put that shit out there and people pick up on it, that's when I realized Trump winning was a coordinated event that like the Democrats facilitated on purpose just as much as the Republicans facilitated. And this idea of like this scapegoating rural communities for decisions that are made by people in power is something that they have done for fucking ever. And then they could do it with Trump too, because they're like, oh, it's just those racist rural folks, when actually it's like, you didn't even bother to knock on doors. We don't have broadband out here. Like people don't told us, if you want us to learn real information, you have to talk to people out here. So it was so intentional and purposeful, but that's really what ended up radicalizing me. And like once I got my master's degree and I learned about like, not just community organizing, but also like practices that are rooted in like trauma-informed understandings of human behavior, I really started to recognize like how our communities, like we are literally mass traumatized and folks are in a state of fight or flight constantly. And people in power are also capitalizing on that, right? Like if you're in your lizard brain, you can't think rationally about like, oh, is this in my best interest or not? Right. Like,
right.
So that like I started using like social work practices like called motivational interviewing and some other stuff just to like talk to people who others would peg right off the bat as like shitty racist, and just to be like, yo, like, let's dig in here, like unpack. Can you tell me more? Like get in your body with me, like feel, and have literally seen people shift from like blaming immigrants for the drug crisis to blaming big pharma without me even saying anything about big pharma. And it's like, this is what they don't want us to know, right? Like they don't want us to be able to heal each other, because then we are a real fucking threat to the powers that be. But that was a long tangent, but I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm so inspired by just like y'all's stories and just so many similarities here.
Just as a side note, I think the three of us also have something in common where we all supported Jay Carey's most recent.
Yes.
So that was a fascinating primary. Those results were staggering for me to see, just because I had gone and done so much door knocking with him, or like, going to precinct meetings via Zoom, or literally driving all the way out to Clay County. And I feel like the amount of legwork that went into it, like I saw basically and this another thing that's stoking the fire for me is just like, your experience with the Hillary campaign is what I saw was like results of like a DCCC candidate in Jasmine, and the concentrated, which we're going to do a numbers crunch too, like this week, as to like how money was spent, who spent it where. But somebody had said Jasmine may have spent like upwards of like $60 some odd a vote. Just because of the amount of fundraising that she'd done, but which is insane. But when the establishment makes choices out here, there's really not a lot of systems in place that can stand up. There's no real tried and true systems of resilience where we are, and so and that's a cycle. It's just like, get them disenfranchised, get them to make babies, get them to convince their babies to work, and then maybe, pipe dreams of leaving here someday onto something greater. And as long as we just keep that rolling, like that pipeline, if we can keep feeding our labor force this framework that, everything will maintain, status quo will maintain. And I was like, after the marching, the George Floyd murder and all the marching that happened in Asheville, like I got the tear gassed and shot with a rubber bullet, and I was hogtied and left in the back of a truck. And when I got out, I was like, fuck this, I'm going to Mexico. I'm done. Like, I have no desire to be a part of this anymore. Like, clearly we're in way over our heads, and there's no way out of this. And it took me being drunk on a rooftop in Mexico, just like soaking in all of this privileged sunshine, to be like, what am I actually doing? Like, get back there. And if like you have the privilege of youth, and you're a relatively intelligent person, you're mobile, you're active, and you can show up, like, you need to be using that to be doing something about it. And I feel like a lot of people feel that disenfranchisement, and they want to leave without without anybody actually, just in something like this, like your podcast, what you're doing, and others in the area in different ways that they like literally just by doing something, you're normalizing a conversation that otherwise people would not have had. Gina and I have had this conversation multiple times at this point, especially where we are in Hendersonville. Like a lot of these conversations people are afraid to have in public places because they don't know what their friends think, or like maybe it's not cool. Somebody overhears this and now they're going to think I'm Antifa or something like that.
Yeah.
So like a lot of these, it's a culture, it's about a culture of normalizing resilience. And, that's,
yeah. And I think that kind of speaks to why we started the podcast too, that there's this intentional effort to make sure that we don't find our community, right? And that we don't acknowledge each other, and that we feel like this like disparate individualism that like we're never going to be able to organize enough people together to make a change, so why bother? And we're constantly saying like they don't want you to know on purpose, like they're making sure you don't know for a reason, and it's because they know that if we all get together we can change it. So like normalizing that conversation is what y'all are doing, what we're trying to do. Like look, it's happening, we're doing it.
Yeah, times are definitely shifting. And yeah, I mean, what you were just saying, Raph, about like the having like a system, like I call it like the foundation in place to battle the establishment with, has been like something that like since I would say probably like 2017, 2018 has been like the dream. Like I have been driving out to Clay County and like up to Yancey County just to like meet with people and organize with them and like literally train them on like motivational interviewing and deep canvassing, so that there's like some kind of like web being built. And, I think what you're saying about like people are scared to talk about this, I've tried to, like, finally, once I like stepped into my power and was like, you know what, fuck it, I am who I am, and like I'll say whatever. Like so many of the people I went to school with or people that I know now are like, thank you so, like, this is amazing, like you're so inspiring, blah blah blah, just from me like literally like speaking out loud, like, no, this is my truth, this is how I feel, like this is what I see happening. And like it has not been for, I think some people, especially, so I've really gotten into like making TikToks, like skits making fun of how I think wealthy white liberals in particular scapegoat poor rural communities without actually trying to make a difference in how they vote or like behave. And they just like to feel morally superior to some group of people. And folks like, they'll come out there and they'll be like, why don't you do something? If you hate it so much, why don't you change things? And I'm like, so last year I had also, Raph, similar situation with running for office. I had decided to launch a campaign against Madison Cawthorn because fuck Jasmine Beach Ferrara. And, and honestly, at that point I was like, no one else on the ballot. Jay, I didn't know Jay as well at that point because he hadn't like come out and made as much of his bold statements as he did towards the end of the primary. And so I was like, I don't have faith in any of these candidates to go to Washington and like actually do things. And I felt like as a similar aged young woman who was from here, like it would be a really strong juxtaposition to like run against him. But I ended up having to withdraw from the race because there's a 90-day rule in North Carolina that if you are not registered with the party that you want to affiliate with on the ballot for at least 90 days primary to the filing date, that you cannot run as a member of that party in their primary. So I was a registered independent. And at that point, the filing date was in December. We decided to launch in September, and it was literally like 2 days after the deadline. So we launched the campaign and then got a call a couple of days after launching that was like, I don't think you can run as a Democrat. And so within a week, we like had to make a decision, like, do we run as an independent, try and collect 14,000 handwritten or 9,000, however many handwritten signatures, and risk splitting the Democratic vote and just handing the election to Cawthorn. And so I decided to withdraw from the race. But at my launch event, we did a direct action. It was right after Tropical Storm Fred had wiped out Crusoe, which is in the county that I live in Haywood County. I had a friend who was literally in an RV on that river that they still have not found his RV that he was living in at the time. Like, and so we held a, like, Cawthorn's voted against many climate justice legislations. And so we held this direct action that was calling him out, like Cawthorn faced the crisis. And at this action, in Haywood County, 24 armed militiamen, counter protesters lined the sidewalks, like fully like bulletproof vests, like swagged out in their like wannabe SWAT gear, to the point where I called my partner. I was like, do not bring our toddler like to this event, because I do not know what is going to happen. And so I just think it's like, when people think that like I'm calling out liberals for like stereotyping poor Appalachia or like poor rural communities, and they think that like I don't know what it's like to try and organize here, I'm just like, y'all have no idea. And then at our pro-choice rally in Haywood County, we had about 7 armed militia people show up. The most recent one in Defensive Row. And the cops in these areas, like you were saying, like Buncombe County is one of the most deadly jails. Here in Haywood County, our cops literally facilitate, they are part of this armed militia. And like when we will have a permit to an event, and the cops will just like stand off to the side and let the armed militia people just like threaten us and like heckle us. And it's like, oh, so glad that we played by the rules and filled out your paperwork so that you do so much for us. But yeah, I don't know why I got on that tangent, but just something about like the fear and the organizing. And they really like, they do try to scare you, literally using arms, like whatever they can do to like get you to stop spreading the truth.
Yep.
It's crazy. It's like, if there's one word to show two sides of this coin, on one side it would be fear, and on the other side it's hope. And it's just like such an old story, you know. But I do want to say, since we're doing this and it's recorded and it's in ink forever, a note to all of our future selves and kids in the future that may find this in some archive or under somebody's bed or something someday, that we are abundantly aware that it's bullshit that we need some thousands of signatures in order for a third party candidate to be viable. And the work that we're doing right now is to change a system so that we don't require a Democratic Party in order to have what we consider to be viable leadership. So it's a thing where we have to now, like when you look back, we had to run as Democrats, like we literally had to. But that, you know, obviously there is no monolith to resistance and independent free thinking. And it's just that the other side has consolidated so uniformly behind such a terrifying narrative that we have to band together behind the largest name or brand in the business, which happens to be the Democratic Party right now, in order to begin the process of changing or improving anything. So yeah. And I appreciate you naming that it's not a monolith. Like there's no one way to approach it. There's a model that I really appreciate, and I want to give credit where credit's due. I learned this from the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective, and they call it the 4 R's. And the 4 R's are reform, which is what you're talking about, like change it from the inside out. Resist, which is like stand the fuck up against shit that isn't even worth reforming. And then reimagine, which is like lead from the imagination. Don't always lead from a place of like against this, like imagine what is possible and then recreate it. And I think a lot of organizing where the failure is that it's just so, like you were saying, like lacking hope, because it's just like, oh, we're just fighting all the time against. And I think we have a really big opportunity to like imagine the kind of community we want to create, and then create it and just say like, we don't fucking need y'all, you know? And then like, and doing that while we're also reforming. And I think it really does take like all of those collective efforts, and something I'm really trying to lean into. And part of this podcast too is like the idea of radical joy is actually just as transformational as like direct action, right? Like creating moments of connection and like lifting up, like I have musician friends that I've been like, I wonder if I can get them to like play a song for the podcast, just like really leaning into like what we all have to offer and how we can like lift each other up while we're also fighting against these really fucking shitty and draining systems.
I can't remember who said this quote, but it's old and it's stuck with me. And it's, if there's not dancing at your revolution, I don't want any part of it.
Oh, it's a song. Yeah.
It was a quote from somebody way back in like the early days who was part of like an early Black resistance.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it comes. I don't know like what the origin of it was, but whenever it like makes me cry whenever I hear it, because it's such a good reminder to like, we're doing this And it's a hard fight, but there's also a lot of joy and a lot of hope. And like, that's how we're going to get through it.
And that joy is attractive. And that's what brings other people in, right? Like, capitalism sucks. If we can create something that doesn't feel like it sucks, then people will naturally want to gravitate.
And it's genuine.
Yeah.
There's also, something I think is an elephant in the room whenever we have a lot of these conversations is like the essentialism and gatekeeping that takes place on our side, with people that don't understand the something I've recently been saying a lot is a spectrum of compromise. And like, there's this sort of essentialist viewpoint where, the thing is, I'm empathetic to it and I understand it because I understand that civility is a privilege, and that some communities have experienced so much, disproportionate and targeted violence over such an extended period of time that they don't have the time, patience, or energy to compromise and to be civil. But that, everybody in their experience is valid and their approach is valid. And to create a culture here regionally where all of that is encompassing, people as they are, where they are, who they are, can be a part of this, is more important to me personally than just being a part of any one particular organization that's going to gatekeep and kind of be shitty and exclusionary and like, no, you got to do it our way, or you have to, be a part of this. And that was something, unfortunately, my personal experience in Asheville, that's something I experienced a lot, was different organizations sort of, using a lot of exclusive language under the guise of, like being, radical, or, meeting moments, and like a lot of, fighting about leadership. And I just saw it as just like, these are literally, you've learned the systems, how they operate, and you're working in Congress. You're not actually, you're actually supporting these systems by functioning the way that they do, instead of actually, having a holistic approach to undoing or, reimagining how things could be. So that was like, whenever I dropped out and supported the candidate here, there was a lot of language from an activist whose name I'm not going to say, but that was like, she was just furious with me. She's like, I thought it was about a revolution. I thought it was about the people and not about some fucking party. Like, you're literally doing something for the Democratic Party instead of what's best for the people. And I was like, well, right now, I think that what's best for the Democratic Party is what's best for our people right here, right now, because unfortunately we don't have a viable, option outside of that. And if I had not done that, surely the Republican candidate would have been elected. Surely. And sure enough, Debbie had won by 200 some odd votes, which was the mark,
would have been yours,
which would have been my vote. It would have split it. And yeah, it was very narrow, and it would have happened. So, there's again, the spectrum of compromise, and, meeting people where they are and understanding that everyone's experience is valid. And sometimes you just gotta shut up, sit down, shut up and listen,
It takes
all the
all
time,
of those.
and sometimes all the time.
I tend to think of like with the resist and reform, like the combination of those two, like I think about like Malcolm X and MLK, right? Like Malcolm X was a much more like hands-on, direct, like if we got to get violent, we got to get violent. And I think because of the presence of the Black Panthers and that like true threat of like to the state, right? Of like, we will fuck you up. That is why they gave in to the reforms that were being pushed by the nonviolent direct action that was happening, right? Like it takes, I think if there was only Martin Luther King Jr. like leading marches and stuff through the streets, which was fantastic and led to a ton of change, I think the state wouldn't have felt as compelled to compromise, right? So we did need like those communities that
like not high pressure.
Exactly. It takes both. But if there had only been that confrontational violent approach, then it would have only been confrontation, and there wouldn't have been a way for there wouldn't have been room for compromise necessarily. So like having those both, and I even think with like the woman who's now on city council, because you stepped back and gave it to her, now you've set yourself up to be able to like pressure the fuck out of her if you want something from her. Whereas if it was a GOP person in that position, like you'd both be screwed, right? So it's like you can now be the resistor while she's the reformer on the inside, and you can have this like multi-angled approach. And I think so many in organizing like just see it as this like straightforward, like win or lose, black or white, but those binaries are sold to us like by this system, and we have to break out of the matrix.
I love that framework. That is so helpful. And it helps clarify the work so much, because I feel a lot like I'm torn between those two. Like, which one is more appropriate, right? Are we going to resist or are we going to reform? Are we going to be loud, or are we going to try to use the channels that are accessible to us that are like, the legal channels, let's say, or like the more socially acceptable channels? Or are we going to be loud and break shit and like scream and yell until we get heard? Or are we going to like be Beto and walk into Greg Abbott's press conference and yell at him? Or are we going to be like, hey, NRA, can we please stand down with the lobbying? Like there's a middle ground there that we don't really think about. And that framework is really helpful to kind of like divide and conquer, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting I personally think about this like all the time, is like the influence social media has on a lot of this, and like how effective our narrative is to people in rural places, and the role that it's played. And imagine to speak to what you're saying about, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, what it would have been like if I had a time machine to go back, because right now all we have are their speeches, some film and recorded audio and newspaper clippings, and maybe some interviews with people that were there. But to be at a speaking event where Malcolm X was speaking, and to speak with the people that were there and to understand where they were coming from and their mindset versus the people who were marching with Martin Luther King across the bridge in Selma, like if you could be there and hear how those people were speaking, then it's kind of like this situation. Like if you could be, you know, armed to the teeth in the streets like they were in Atlanta after the George Floyd murder, you know, like literally armed and like ready to fight. If you could be in that crowd and hear what those people were saying versus the people who, you know, are showing up to every council meeting or every, you know, commissioner meeting and, you know, trying to have that action in a more political way. Both are viable and important pieces of this puzzle. And it would just be fascinating to be able to experience back then, when a lot of this was, you know, a lot of these conversations really breaking ground for the first time, how Malcolm X impressed upon the people in the rooms he was speaking to versus how Martin Luther King Jr. impressed upon the people in the rooms he was speaking to. And if social media had existed at that time, how the fans of those speakers would have been discussing what that was like. Because now we have that, where we do have more, you know, like physically radical, you know, organizations. And then we also have more politically motivated organizations. And we see them kind of having conversations and, you know, coalescing on like a lot of these issues. And I think ultimately, if we just keep on keeping on, those conversations are going to evolve and the tactics are going to evolve. And I mean, we only get stronger the longer we try. So.
Yeah, that's right. We're definitely like at a shifting point too. I think like in mass, like COVID and like the worker strikes that are happening and the union, like you can just feel like the way that people are like, they saw and were able to imagine what it would look like without having to live under capitalism at the beginning of COVID, right? When it was like the earth was healing itself, we were getting checks every month, like, you know, and we didn't have to, I mean, the grocery store, like shortage, whatever it was, but we didn't have to struggle with so much at that point. And that's how it could always be. And I really think that that's like helped to stimulate like, oh, maybe we can think differently about like some of these approaches that we've been taking. And maybe we actually can organize our Starbucks in Boone, which shout out to the Starbucks workers.
Yes.
They did get it done. So yeah, I think we are only getting stronger. And I do think like, you know, with the internet and like manipulation of information, there's a lot of threats there. But honestly, like, I've seen even TikTok, for example, like I made like 2 TikToks, like hashtagged Appalachian leftist, and like fell into my people, like a community of people I never would have known, like from West Virginia to Chattanooga, like up and down the range, who are like doing this work. And now we're able to connect with each other. And like, you know, I'm going to be interviewing people who like have what they call free stores, which is just a mutual aid store where they just take donations. People come in and shop and everything's free. And it's like they're recreating work in that 4R model, right? Like they're recreating what is possible. And then I'm going to be talking to people who like have spent 23 days in jail because they were doing the resisting work. And then we've got like, hopefully I'll be able to talk to people who are in elected office that are like radical folks that are doing the reformation work. And like, we can connect with each other now and really start to see all of the ways that we can plug and play like a puzzle instead of just like saying we all have to fall in line.
Yeah. Exhale.
This is the most
I get so
hyped
up. I'm sorry.
There was, have you heard about the Free Store in Maggie Valley? This is a little bit of a tangent. It was in that hotel.
So that was the Little Blue Pantry. We have Little Blue Pantries all over Haywood County, and they're not quite free stores so much as they are just like outdoor pantries that you can access. So they're food oriented, and you can access them at any time, and people can just like drop off food or take food.
Nice.
And yeah, there was, I mean, the one outside the motel in Maggie Valley, for y'all who don't know, look up Our Place. There was a whole thing. They, in the summer of 2020, this motel owner put up signs after the death of George Floyd. It said ACAB, one rotten apple will rot the whole barrel or something like that. And it was to generate conversation, and it worked, but it ended up also, I mean, we're in a small town, everybody knows everybody. So the cops literally fucking took the Little Blue Pantry off their property at one point. They were like harassing them multiple times, like, etc. But we actually do have a free store. It's not called a free store, but it's in Canton. And they just call it the thrift store, but everything's free. And it was started, I don't know if she wants me to say her name, so I won't. But there's this amazing local, like multi-generational local woman who has just dedicated herself to feeding our neighbors. And so she works with a couple of different orgs. One's called Feeding the Multitudes. We've got some other ones, but they all came together to open this store. And it is just, you walk in, you take what you need. And I think they're open certain days and times of the week. And that's what I want. When I was helping to organize some of the relief efforts after the flood in Crusoe, and at one point we had taken over the Crusoe Community Center, and it was that, and then there was this other like big warehouse called the Outpost, and we had both of them filled, I mean, to the brim. Like it was probably the size of like a roses, honestly, like just with
roses.
Everything.
That is the most redneck size thing I've ever heard in my life.
Food line, you know, it's not as big as a Walmart or an Ingles, but it's like, it's getting bigger than a Dollar General. But it just filled to the brim with like food and clothes, diapers galore, formula, like everything you could need, because people were like, oh, we've got to support all of these folks who are just hit by the flood. And we had shopping carts, and people could just come in, fill their shopping cart with whatever they needed and leave. And at the community center, we had an industrial kitchen. So we were serving people 3 hot meals a day. And we had teams of volunteers who would come in and bring the food to cook, make the meals. And folks like who were in the wake of losing everything would be sitting down at these tables, like eating a hot meal, like laughing and talking to each other. And at one point, I don't go to church anymore, but I'm still like fairly spiritual. And I was working with this preacher from the Methodist church, and we looked at each other and I was like, this is heaven on earth. Like, this is what it is meant to be like, because you could just feel it, where people were like, yeah, I may have lost everything, but everything I need is right here. Like when we have each other and we feel connected and we feel loved, and like, that's what I feel like the free stores are able to do too. And we just need so much more of that.
Yeah. And I feel like it's like anecdotally, easy to get people on board with giving things. Sometimes, like we did a little bit of, we had Jay bring up some stuff that we had, like donations organized here in town at the brewery that my husband works at. We just put up signs and like a Tupperware, a Rubbermaid container. And we were like, whatever you can bring, like bedding, clothing, diapers, formula, whatever, bring it and drop it off. And Jay brought it up. We did the same thing for the Black Jewel coal miners in Harlan County when they were blocking the coal truck from leaving because they weren't getting paid. And they, by the way, still have not gotten paid. Even though they won their lawsuit, they're still waiting on that money. But getting people involved politically is nebulous sometimes, and it's hard, but saying like your brothers and sisters are out here and they need food and they need diapers and like they don't have clothes and it's going to get cold out, that gets people motivated. Like people will go to their closets and be like, I have an extra coat, I can give this one, or I can run and grab an extra pack of diapers when I'm at the store picking them up. Like it gets people involved in a way that I don't think I see in any other way. Like people like being able to give.
Yeah, I think that's one of the sources of connection that capitalism has stolen from us is like,
yes.
we are meant to be codependent, right? Like we are
right to exist as a community.
Yeah. I'm not good at everything, right? But exactly. You're going to be good at the things that I'm not good at. And someone else is going to be good at the things that both of us suck at. And that's why we are pack animals, because it's like, we need the person who can tend to the garden and the person who can rear the kids and the person who can teach. And capitalism, like this individual, like, and even the nuclear family thinking that like two people can do it all together, right? It's like, absolutely. Now that I have a 2-year-old, that is fucking false. I need a village more than ever. And yeah, I think people like when they have the opportunity to reconnect with that idea of coexistence, like it really does almost target like a primal sense of joy where it's like, yes, I get to reconnect with my people.
Yes. Yeah. We have a diaper and formula drive every Friday at my work. And so we rotate who works that bank. And it's like the executive director does it, like everybody rotates, and it's everybody's favorite thing to do because you get that like immediate serotonin hit of like, oh, you need diapers? Here you go. I'm not going to ask you any questions. I don't need to know your name. I don't need to know how much money you make. I don't need to know your immigration status. You just need diapers and I'm going to hand them to you and you can walk out. And it's like the best feeling in the world. And it's so simple, but it's so not available that it's like a motivation for people to want to do that work. And it brings out that joy and that sense of like, I'm doing something that's helpful. And I know that it's helpful because I watched it help somebody. I watched them put those kids in those diapers.
I think it also reestablishes like a sense of dignity for both people involved.
Yes.
Like, which is like, you know, I think we're always having to prove our worth like in this society, but like when you're able to show someone like you deserve no matter what, like you feel their dignity and then they also feel their dignity and respect in that moment. And so there's definitely something about that too, that I think is like creates that positive feeling.
Yeah.
Well, y'all, so tell us a little bit about your podcast. What are some of the things that y'all talk about and like, what are you hoping to get out of this podcast for both y'all and the listeners? Big question.
A whole new world. Oh, geez.
Well, I think that there's we started it wanting to have a place for all of our community efforts to kind of get like a central place, right? Like there's all kinds of stuff happening all over the region that we wanted to bring to one spot where we could talk about all the stuff that's going on, all the community action stuff, all the culture pieces to like celebrate the work that's going on here. And when we started it, our friend was going to be our producer, which would have been dope. But I think we got too political too fast for him. And both of us were like, well, we can't not do, like, we can't, it's in everything. Like it's everything that we do is political, and we're going to keep making it political. So if that's not going to work, it's not going to work. And he's so, you know, we're all so good now, but we don't have that production piece. And we have more and we have more of a political bent than I think we originally planned on, because we had to kind of shake that up a little bit and kind of reconfigure after we were looking back at the first episode script, and we have the third person in there as part of the script. And when we realized the first episode, he's not in there at all. So we kind of like reorganized at the very beginning from what our original idea was. And especially because of the time that we're in right now, it's impossible. I mean, we feel like it's impossible to talk about stuff that's going on here and leave politics out of it. Like that is what's going on here. It is
that we've said on the episodes we've recorded so far that the personal is political. Like that's
exactly.
Oh, yeah, I say virtually every day I say that.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And on the personal note, you know, Gina and I had actually went off on a tangent, which shocker. Yeah. At some point I'm just like, because she tends to write the script for it, you know, kind of organize it. And we use Google Docs, and, you know, we'll be sitting there talking, and I'll see her cursor move past where I'm speaking, and she'll be like, inserting like, you know, something she's copy and pasting from like online. I got to talk about this or whatever, like while we're talking. But I do all the editing. So occasionally I'm overwhelmed. She occasionally does help. But
our roles are fluid.
Yeah. But we went off on this tangent about like why, like just straight up asked her one day. I was like, what are we doing? Like, why are we doing this? Like, we had to really unpack it. And then she kind of like pivoted that towards me. And on a personal note, you know, I guess like in the beginning, it was more of like, you know, like what we were touching on earlier, we're normalizing conversations with, you know, outside of the political action and outside of this sort of like, you know, nebulous leftist resistance like framework. There's also like the solitude and the loneliness that people find themselves feeling when they realize they can't just have this fucking conversation over a beer at a bar or something with their friend, because maybe they don't know what their friend's going to think about it, or somebody next to them might be like, oh, you're one of them Antifa or something like that. You know, it's just like kind of just like a light, sending out like a lighthouse, like a beacon for those people to be like, hey, look, other people are definitely talking about this.
Exactly.
Like other people, this is totally normal. Like other people are having these conversations, and these people are not crazy, the crazy activist people. These people they own a business downtown. These people, you know, work in this job or they do this thing, you know, it's like they're totally regular people, and they all share common threads. And so the personal part is realizing that, you know, I've been accused many times of being too political by my friends. It's just like, God, it's so exhausting. It's always politics with you. I'm like, how is it not always politics with you?
And you should be exhausted because the politics is there, whether or not I'm talking about it.
Right. Yeah. So I guess, you know, creating a canvas where people can actually see that the personal is political, or you can actually see how things impact, you know, something like our last episode, we talked about maybe it was the last one where we talked about the district attorney, and about a murder that happened. It was just really fascinating to watch it kind of get not covered up, but like kind of buried in the news, maybe a little covered up, and to see
I mean, there were no charges filed because he's related to a sheriff's deputy.
Oh, I mean, this is a conspiracy for another day, and I don't necessarily want to get charged with like libel or slander or anything, but we know for a fact that there is human trafficking that runs straight through Haywood County because of Highway 40. And we also are pretty sure we know exactly who is in elected office that is well aware and involved in that.
Yes.
So,
we talked to someone who confirmed it.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I cut you off because I got mad about the cover up. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, the cover up. Yeah, please. The DA cover up. I'm just not surprised to hear about that at all. Please keep going.
Yeah, but I mean, it's happening right here in everybody's backyard. But you know, and national conversations tend to dominate the narrative here instead of local conversations. And that's by design, right? So it's like get everybody super exhausted about the attack on Roe, so that they're not paying attention to, you know, this thing happening over here, or which, I mean, by the way, that's not to diminish the attack on Roe at all. It's just that like overexposure is real, and it's super intentional to get these people exhausted and tired of what's happening on, you know, in the nation as a whole versus what's happening right here in their backyard. So, you know, and then also to be a little petty for a fucking second, because I can be, fuck Chad Nesbitt. He's got his shit. I want, you know, I want to have fucking my shit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
fuck that dude
Okay.
for the platform he has. And like, you know, the other side should have platforms like that as well, and more of them instead of one, you know, just
Yeah.
like, just to show a stronger, you know, infrastructure of, you know, community there.
At the launch event for the congressional campaign last year, where all the armed people showed up, so Chad Nesbitt was there covering it on his fake news channel, and we did a chalk mural on the sidewalk as part of our action.
Antifa.
And we were Antifa vandalizing the courthouse, according to Chad Nesbitt, and he cried about it. I
Oh my
made
God.
Chad Nesbitt cry, and that is going to be
Congratulations.
my biggest victory when I look back in this lifetime.
Aw, I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm so glad.
Crowning achievement.
God, he cried. I
Cry more, Chad.
cried over Chad.
I will do all the chalk murals I need to do if it makes you sob like a baby.
For real. I mean, the histrionics, right? And like the irony of calling us the emotional party and the snowflakes when you're crying over a chalk
And
mural.
when you bring
like,
all of your closest friends with their guns to scare off a 27-year-old woman from running for office, like, oh, I must be so intimidating, you guys.
yeah, we're so sorry for you, Chad.
Anyways, so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And honestly, we do need more platforms because Chad and his cronies have plenty. And Gina, what about for you when you started this podcast with Raph? What were you hoping to get out of it? Or at this point, what are you hoping folks get out of it?
So I think for me, it kind of circles back to that concept of wanting to bring people out of the shadow community, right? That we've all had these kind of underground networks that we've all made, even if they're 3 or 4 friends that you go to protests with. We all have this kind of like, we can't talk about it at work. We can't talk about it at home. We've got to keep it quiet type of mentality about the way that we exist, even though we know that it's right and good and true and honest, and like, we still feel like we have to be quiet about it. So trying to break that stigma a little, trying to bring community together a little, and trying to find those pockets where we already exist and bring them into light. Since we've been doing it, I have learned so much about my own town that like, there's no way that if I hadn't had a specific reason, I would even have thought, you know, not to say that like I wouldn't have run into these people eventually at something that I was doing, but to have a specific reason to bring people together and a platform to talk about their work on has been super enlightening and humbling and exciting. So that's the kind of energy that I'm hoping we can keep on with the podcast, is that like everybody learning from each other kind of vibe that we have right now, or that I mean, you feel like you know your community, and we definitely know a lot of the community, but there's so much here that like it just keeps coming, like y'all doing this podcast, like talking to the people that we've interviewed about the work that they are doing. It's a game changer, and it's like, it gives me hope. And we've gotten good feedback from the community that people are like, we need this, like we need y'all and like your podcast, like we need that, because it's so isolating out here sometimes. So I guess for me, the goal is to like be a tiny part of letting people know that they're not isolated in it, and that there's enough people to make 2 fucking whole podcasts about it. So like, you're not alone. There's a lot of us, and we all give a shit, and we're all amped about it.
Yes, that's right. I mean, if it's any test, I was so I mean, I had this feeling that people were like hungry for this type of stuff, because like I was already a part of like this Appalachian leftist Facebook group, and like I had made my way into this TikTok community. So I knew I had my fingers out there, but like we have not even dropped any content yet. And we have over 400 followers on Instagram.
Dude,
Like,
I saw that shit.
And we
That's
just
amazing.
launched our Instagram like less than 2 weeks ago. We got over 12 followers on it's like a Patreon. It's called Ko-Fi. And like, people are just like, they're so ready for this, because they do feel so alone. And they're like, thank God, like someone else is talking about this. So yeah, I just love that like y'all are doing this too. And I was talking to someone else who, I referred to as a light bringer, and they referred to me as the same thing. And I think y'all are, and we're building a constellation, right, of community and like truth and joy. And so I'm just so grateful that y'all are doing this. I know we've been on here for a while, so I want to be respectful of time. So as we wrap up, like, where can folks find y'all, and how can they support you?
Yeah, we are not on Facebook. I don't know if I'll ever be down to be on Facebook with our podcast, but we are on Instagram, which I know it's weird because it's literally the same fucking company. But I think just it kind of helps, honestly, not to be like, all like, fuck Facebook, but honestly, fuck a lot of the user content and shit and the trolls. It's just like it's like at least one barrier to the trolling and everything like that may or may not happen in the future. That's just how I feel about it personally.
Instagram just has a few more like limitations that keep things kind of like contained.
Right, yeah. So we are on Instagram. It's Fire Mountain Pod, Fire MTNPOD. That's our Instagram. Mm-hmm. Fire MTNPOD. If folks want to check us out, we are on Spotify, and we are not on Apple yet, but we are on Google and Amazon. And sorry, our Instagram's actually bigger. It's Fire on the Mountain _podcast. Is
Mountain spelled out, or is it MTN?
It's spelled
Mountain
out.
Spelled out.
Fire on the Mountain _podcast. Yeah.
Cool. We'll put it in the show notes too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then we have our Patreon. So back to, if you want to listen to us, we are on YouTube. We are on, we have videos that people can just kind of play and listen to. And we are also on Spotify, Amazon, Google Play, Google Music, or is it Google Podcasts? I'm dropping the bomb on this plug right now. Do you want to do this?
We don't do a whole lot of tech in this neck of the woods.
Yeah, I'm like
the Google one.
The Google one.
Yes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
And people can donate to help us because we're poor as fuck.
Because they rent studio space, y'all. So throw in some money to help them with that rental fee.
Yes,
thanks, girl.
Thank you. Our Patreon, we are on Patreon. And our Patreon is
patreon.com/Fire on the Mountain Pod. Spelled out.
Okay, cool.
So pod, POD, not podcast, but Fire on the Mountain, POD.
Cool. Yeah, just text those to me, Gina, or DM them to me on Instagram, as we've been doing, and I'll make sure we get it right in the show notes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool.
That wraps up today's episode of Rednecks Rising. Thanks so much for everybody who's been tuning in since the launch on June 14th. All of your support has just been above and beyond, and I am so grateful. And for those of you who want to support the pod, make sure to head over to our Ko-Fi. You can give us a follow. It doesn't cost you anything. That's spelled ko-fi.com/rednecksrising. And you can follow, get updates. You can also get your hands on some amazing merch if that's what floats your boat. And if you feel like making a financial contribution, you can become a monthly contributor where you'll get access to our Discord community. You can vote in polls to help us decide what topics to cover and get access to some other amazing perks. And if you know somebody or some bodies that we should sit down with for an interview, then make sure to reach out to us at rednecksrising@gmail.com or on any of our social media channels. I am so excited to talk to y'all again next week. And in the meantime, take care.